Hello, I'm Denver Henderson, the Assistant Director of the Williams County Public Library, with another episode of Oddly Peculiar. This month's episode deals primarily with coincidence. How a famous architect, an award-winning actress, and a children's toy all have a small connection to the town of Bryan. It begins with Kenneth Baxter. He was the son of Charles Baxter, who lived in Bryan in his early boyhood. Charles went off to make his career, marry, and have children. His son, Kenneth, made his way back to Bryan as the vice president of the Bryan Sheet Metal Company. Along the way, Kenneth met Catherine Wright. We don't know how they met, but we do know one thing. She was the daughter of what is undoubtedly America's most famous architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. The wedding was announced in the Bryan Democrat and stated they would be making their home on North Myers Street in Bryan at the Horn property. I've been unable to locate where this was, but I'm continuing my search. The Baxters lived here for about 2 years, until the Bryan Sheet Metal Company moved its factory to Michigan City, Indiana. There they had a daughter named Anne. Anne would pursue a career in acting, and quite successfully too. She won the Oscar for her role in the 1946 film The Razor's Edge. However, she is probably most famous for playing the scheming Eve Harrington in the 1950 film All About Eve. Throughout the years, several articles in local newspapers claimed she was born on West High Street in Bryan. However, the dates of the Baxters' residency here and Anne's birth simply don't coincide, and Michigan City is always listed as her place of birth. Kenneth and Catherine Baxter made many friends while they lived in Williams County and frequently came back for visits. Kenneth went on to be an executive with the Seagrams Corporation. He died in 1977 in Santa Barbara, California. Catherine Baxter died in 1979 in California and is buried with the Wright family near her father at Unity Chapel Cemetery in Wyoming, Wisconsin. Anne Baxter continued to act until the mid-1980s. She died of a stroke in 1985. Ah, and Lincoln Logs? Well, this is indeed a stretch to connect to Bryan. In fact, it honestly has no connection to Bryan, but it's still quite a coincidence. John Wright, Catherine Baxter's brother, followed his father into the field of architecture. In 1916, he developed an architecture toy based on his father's molds for the Imperial Hotel in Japan. Wright was issued U.S. patent in August 31st, 1920, for a toy cabin construction. Soon after, he changed the name to John L. Wright Manufacturing, and the original Lincoln Log set came with instructions on how to build, as well as Abraham Lincoln's cabin, also Uncle Tom's cabin. Subsequent sets were larger and more elaborate. Lincoln Logs are believed to be the first toy to be marketed to both boys and girls and appeal to a simple type of creativity. There is no evidence that Frank Lloyd Wright, John Wright, or Anne Baxter ever visited Bryan. But for a brief time in the early 20th century, a small connection was made in this small town to the greater world. And that story is certainly oddly peculiar.